Thank you, Mr. President. And speaking earlier, I forgot to, and it correlates to Warren, forgot to tell you where I work, and that's at the Trust Company of Tennessee, a relationship manager, and I work with families and organizations, helping them with wealth management. Robert Hill serves on that board. So, but in my professional world, you know, one of the things that you realize is this community, and you get introduced to organizations in the area that hold key parts and a very key role in the success of this community. One of those undoubtedly is the East Tennessee Historical Society, the East Tennessee History Center. So leading the charge there at the ETHS, the society, is Dr. Warren Dockter. So you'll be Dockter. And very thrilled to have Warren here. I grew up in Granger County, so a native East Tennessean. Worked for his family's sign company in Blount County. After attending the University of Tennessee, he went on to further his education and received his master's and PhD from the University of Nottingham in England and United Kingdom. He was awarded a fellowship role at the University of Cambridge in England, and has been a historian in Wales. And Wales is also where his wife, Arthur, is from as well. So also leadership in Knoxville, recent graduate, so committed to this community, and certainly excited to share the vision of the East Tennessee Historical Society with Rotary today. So ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Warren Dockter.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Warren Dockter. You don't have to call me Doctor. At the last East Tennessee Awards, East Tennessee History Awards we did, I introduced myself as Dr. and no one laughed because I've been using that joke for 2 years since I got here. So I want to do 3 things today. And the first one is tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the East Tennessee Historical Society. And then finally, I'm going to end, because ultimately I am a history professor, on a little history lesson about the origin of the word Tennessee. So bear with me a little bit. So a little bit about me. Like Chris said, I grew up in Granger County. I spent a lot of time in Blount County as well. That's where my father's folks are from, in Blount County. That's a picture of my grandfather's house up there. His name was Albert W. Dockter. I'm named for him. My name is Albert Warren Dockter. That was his name. And he's one of the reasons I fell in love with history so early on. And this is one of the reasons I think we bring to the East Tennessee Historical Society what I like to call an intergenerational sort of view of history. I learned so much from my grandfather and had such a fantastic relationship with him. And it was very important in my dad's house and in my grandfather's house. You know, if you were at the dinner table, you kind of had to know what you were talking about history. And I got really interested. And my grandfather started taking me to the historic homes around Knoxville, like Ramsey House, which is, of course, the founder of the East Tennessee Historical Society in 1834. We went to James White Fort. We went to Blount Mansion. And my grandfather really started nurturing this love of history in me. And as it went on, we started going to more and more places. We started going to Civil War battle sites every summer. Then we started going to American Revolution battle sites. So that by the time I graduated high school, my grandfather and I had been to every state but Hawaii together. I am blessed that I got so much time with my grandfather. And that's where my love of history came from. And I loved it so much, I decided to do a degree in history at the University of Tennessee, not Alabama. A lot of talk about Clemson and Alabama up here today, guys. So go Vols. And then I was able to get a scholarship, and I went to the University of Nottingham to do my MA, and then I got a scholarship to do my PhD. And I focused there mostly on the British Empire and what the British Empire did in the 19th to 20th century. That's what my own work is on. Of course, East Tennessee was a part of the British Empire at one point. And so I'm very lucky that when I was able to apply for this position, my expertise sort of helped me out. So that's also a picture of Fore Valley Road, by the way, in Granger County, where I grew up. So I spent some time in Britain. I got really interested in genealogy. My mother's maiden name is McCurry. And so there's obviously a Scotch-Irish connection there. And in fact, my great-grandfather at Maryville College was the dean of the men's school. His name was E.E. McCurry. And we were able to trace our family lineage all the way back to a specific place in the Highlands near the McDonald clan in Scotland. And so I went to Edinburgh and did some genealogical research. There are these fantastic genealogical archives in Britain. And so that's another one of the reasons I love ETHS is we have one of the most complete collections of family archives because of the First Families collections. Anyone ever heard of the First Families collection? I'll talk about that in just a moment. But if you're not a member, you should, and you're interested in your genealogy, you should join. There's some really amazing stuff that we do there. I joined Cambridge as a research fellow. I did some time. I worked. Anybody know who Boris Johnson is? I worked with him on his book on Winston Churchill. We worked together for about 2 years. I can answer questions about him at the end. It was a lot of fun, maybe too much fun. And then I became a professor of history and international politics at the University of Aberystwyth in Wales, which also has a fantastic genealogical research library, where there are several letters that I found in Welsh going back to and from people in Tennessee and around the South about the Civil War. There's a huge American Civil War collection in letters home that they have in Welsh, which is really remarkable. So that's been my journey. I was able to come back here and become the president and CEO of the East Tennessee Historical Society, which I love. Now, let me tell you a little bit about ETHS. We are responsible for the history in the 35 counties of the Grand Division of East Tennessee, which are highlighted there. And our mission is to preserve, promote, and interpret the history of East Tennessee. So we really see ourselves as sort of one of the primary hubs, certainly of East Tennessee history, probably of history in the state. And we do a lot of work around this. And one of the things that we do is we run the museum. And you can see it's not a great picture there, but that's Davy Crockett's actual rifle. We care for objects like that are priceless. I mean, and are incredible. We have beads that were given from Ataculaculla to Dragon Canoe that were Cherokee beads. I mean, we have incredible things in our collection. We also have a really big trolley car. So we have two exhibits. Originally, when I was supposed to come to speak last year, I was going to speak on our exhibit on the World's Fair 1982 World's Fair. I came down with COVID literally the day I was supposed to come speak and had to cancel. And so now the feature exhibit that we have on is about film and theater in East Tennessee. So we've been very, very proud of that. We're working with the Clarence Brown Theater, and we have a program coming up called the History Hootenanny, which is going to work with the Clarence Brown Theater. That's August 19th if you're interested in coming. And so what we do is we don't just run the museum, we also have lots of educational programs. We work in the schools in the 35 counties. We are one of the big hubs of National History Day. And in fact, this year we had students who placed in the top 10 in the national category. So we are really, really invested in the education of children. We run lots of fun programs to do that. We just started a new program called Little History Lessons for sort of preschoolers. They come into a new area. You can see a picture of it up there, but we call History HQ. That's for families. And they learn fun, interactive history things. It's sort of like it's almost like a history breakout room, and there's lots of scavenger hunts and fun things for kids to do. So we always have lots of stuff. If you are a family, you want to bring in your kids, we have lots of stuff for kids to do while you go to the museum. And we also go out and work on historic homes. We have programs that bring in students from rural counties into the museum, where we have a program called Appalachia Sessions, where we have partnered with a TV group. It's a TV show where we bus in these students from rural counties, and many of whom have never been to Knoxville. And then they go through the museum and they see and learn about East Tennessee history and culture, and then they go see a musical concert. And so the idea is that we're leveraging the history and culture of music to get kids interested in history itself. And so we have lots of fun programs like that. Some of the other things that we do, and we're also updating our website currently, and we're hopefully going to launch it this month. If you, I know a lot of you are downtown, we have the brown bag lectures around noon. You can bring in some food and listen to our experts come speak. We have those lectures. These are, again, some of the exhibits, the feature exhibits that we've had that have been award winning. Black and white and in the Jim Crow era won, I think, 6 awards at TAM. And you may remember the Mount Dew exhibition, which is still a traveling exhibition and was last in UT Martin. So it's also an award-winning exhibition that we travel to different areas. So this is a part of how we put the history out there. We also have three major publications. Newsline is our sort of, we try to run it twice a year. It's just an update so everyone knows what's going on. It's a fun little magazine we have. Our flagship publication is the Journal of East Tennessee History. It's our academic journal. And right now we are digitizing. We're really close to finishing this project to digitize all of them. It's been published since 1929. It has never been put online. And so we're hoping to make this available for researchers globally. We partnered with a group called Muse, which is like JSTOR, if you're super nerdy like me. And so we're putting this out into universities and libraries across the world once it's completely scanned. We also have Tennessee Ancestors, which is also being scanned. That's our genealogical journal that we put out so that people who are interested in local history and local genealogy can use these stories. And we're also scanning them and putting them online with our new website. So these are all some of the big things we're doing to kind of get out and get reach. And again, if you're interested in First Families, which is one of our genealogical programs, to join, you have to be able to kind of prove through documents that your family was here at the founding of the state. And Tennessee Ancestors is a great way to be able to do that. We have genealogists in particular, Ann Bloomquist, who helped me with my own application to the SAR, the Sons of American Revolution. And so through this process, I was able to learn just in joining First Family that I have 3 ancestors, in fact, who served the American Revolution. And so it's just amazing what you can learn about yourself. And then suddenly, you know, the philosophy of what we're doing here is taking these kind of abstract historical stories and showing that they're real people. These are real people that make real decisions. And that's what interests me, I think, as a historian, really, is that, you know, a lot of historians are interested in historical forces. You know, if you're a Marxist historian, you look at class and all that kind of stuff. No force has agency. Only people have agency. So that's what we try to celebrate at ETHS for people and the decisions that they make. And so that's for me what's very, very important. And you know, we love what we do. We have a lot of fun. And I don't know if you can see, this is a picture, a selfie picture. That's I can't remember her last name. Shannon used to work for WBIR, and we were trying to win a selfie competition where I was taking a selfie of myself with her jumping, like jumping Bill in the background. And anyway, so we do have a lot of fun, because that's another thing I try to make sure everyone remembers, is that history is fun. It isn't just boring dates you have to memorize. It's people's stories, and it's more important if they're your stories. And so, you know, when you think, gosh, my granddad could have done something that's in the museum, like that's amazing. So we try to do that. We try to focus on that kind of intergenerational relationship between grandparents and grandchildren. And we try to just make sure everybody has fun learning what they do. So the final bit of my talk is a history lesson. So you have to indulge me a moment. We're going to be looking at the etymology of the word Tennessee. Apologies if you've heard this before. I know, in full disclosure, I know you have. He's on my page. So the etymology of Tennessee. Tennessee is a really interesting word, because nobody's 100% sure what the word Tennessee means. The actual meaning of the word itself. We know what Tennessee is, what Tennessee is, but we don't know what it means. So we have to go all the way back to accounts of the Spanish conquistadors. Hernando de Soto, who first came to East Tennessee in the 1540s, encountered Cherokee Indians. He also encountered a group of Yuchi Indians. And Tristan de Luna also came at the same time. But more importantly for our story, Captain Juan Pardo came in the 1560s. And in the 1560s, he came over around in Newport. This is what most historians would argue now, though this is all kind of changing. And he encountered a group of Yuchi Indians, and when he asked where they were, what this place was called, they responded to him that it was called Tenasque. And so this is recorded in Spanish maps. And recently, in fact, in February, I was in Spain trying to find some of Juan Pardo's records, and they had moved them from Madrid to somewhere else. And so I wasn't able to actually see them. That's his memorial. That's his in the cemetery. That's where he's buried, Juan Pardo. But this starts coming up in maps that it's called Tenasque. And you can see these different villages of Yuchi people in Spanish maps when they were first here. So about 100 years later, the Yuchi as a tribe almost were not totally gone, but had really shrunk in their power. And the Cherokee had risen in their power quite significantly. And in the 1670s, British fur traders started to move down into Tennessee, and in particular, Abraham Wood and James Needham. What's remarkable to me, and this is because I'm a historian of empire, you can see that French explorers are coming in from Mississippi from the west in the same year. So Louis Gillet and Jacques Marquette are moving into West Tennessee in the same year. So you can already see that Tennessee as a concept is going to be important, right? Because you've got these competing imperial powers trying to move into the region. Anyway, the British traders eventually get to Monroe County and they ask the Cherokee, what is this land called? What do we call this land? And the Cherokee say Tenase, which is the original sort of Cherokee version of the word. And then that starts appearing on early maps. So recently I've been studying the maps that you can see in English maps that were done by Cherokee, I'm going to say Cherokee agents that would go out and kind of map the territory. The earliest one we have is 1725, and it's marked as Tenase. And so you can see that this starts happening. And in fact, there's a place in Monroe County that's called Tenase, and that's the marker there. That's a picture of the marker. So the word itself is still sort of a question. Why is it spelled the way it is? So we know that it comes from this Yuchi word. We know that the Cherokee adopted kind of version of it in the way that the Greeks adopted, or the Romans adopted versions of the Greek language. And so what's interesting is before we had a sort of concrete way of spelling things, people kind of just spelled things how they sounded phonetically. So James Glenn adopted the spelling of Tennessee that we know today as his personal spelling of Tennessee in the 1750s. When Henry Timberlake, who wrote the draft of Cherokee County and his memoirs, he adopted James Glenn's spelling of Tennessee because he wanted to win favor with the governor, right? In order to get maybe more money or more whatever, and to be doted upon. So he starts spelling Tennessee that way. So in his memoirs, which of course still survive, he adopts that spelling of Tennessee. So Henry Timberlake goes in, he spends a lot of time with the Cherokee. He comes back and publishes his memoirs, which is the draft of Cherokee County, which is a map of what will become the Tennessee River. And so that by the time we get past the American Revolution into the 1790s and Tennessee is founded, it's that spelling of Tennessee that is adopted. That still doesn't answer our final question. For years, in particular, James Mooney, at the turn of the century, by which I mean the 1900s, not the 2000, I have to remind my students that sometimes they did, that he spent a lot of time researching this, and he argues that actually the original meaning is lost. That because it was a Cherokee sort of amalgamation of an original Yuchi word, that the original understanding of the word itself could never be done. But there's been a whole lot of work done recently. And I mean, in the last like 2 or 3 years, I've been reading about this voraciously. The Yuchi language is what's called a linguist isolate because it's unlike any other language anywhere in the world. And its closest thing is Muskogean, but it's not like that. And so there are still people in Oklahoma who are a part of what's now the Creek Confederation, who still speak Yuchi, and they're trying to do a lot of research on the language itself. And so there are different now acknowledgements of what Tennessee may mean. One of them, and this one was published in a journal, I think 2 years ago, is that Tenase or Tenasque comes from Tenasee, which means the brothers' water place. It may also mean where the waters meet, which kind of makes sense if you think around where the Nolichucky River runs into, if you're thinking around Newport, that kind of makes sense. Or even if you come further south and you think about where the Holston meets, you can see two rivers meeting there, fork of the river, that makes sense as well. So there's lots of work being done on this, but there is another explanation. And this is my favorite, is that it is the meeting place. This is the one I choose to believe that it means. That's not to say that this is correct. But because if you think about this story about the word Tennessee, it's indicative of the importance of East Tennessee, historically speaking. You can see the layers of different civilizations, different empires, the Yuchi, the Cherokee, the Spanish, the French, the English, all colliding, all happening here in our backyard. And, I was so enamored and written of all of this old ancient history. The ancient history is here too. It's always been here. It's just maybe more difficult to think about, but all these different global powers fighting over this 35 county region we're talking about where we live today. East Tennessee is one of the most historically unique places maybe in the world. And I mean, even not just historically speaking, but think of the 20th century. You know, when we try to look at this in the museum, we had the national park was put here, right? We had the TVA was put here. This is also a story of federal larger powers coming in and moving people off the land, which we see in the 17th and 18th century. But we also see the story of Oak Ridge, and you know, Oppenheimer just came in. So East Tennessee has contributed to, and I mean this, global history constantly. And people don't, you know, they think, oh, Tennessee, whatever, you know. I'm telling you, East Tennessee is one of the most historically important places I know of, because it has changed the axis of world powers multiple times. In the 20th century with the atomic bomb, in the Civil War, you could argue, because of course Knoxville and East Tennessee wasn't actually a Confederate area. And you know, if you studied the Battle of Fort Sanders, you know that. In the 18th and 17th century, because you have competing imperial powers trying to control this area. So it's just a remarkable place. So I like to think that it means meeting place, because all these historical forces meet here with us, with these people through this story. And we all come together, and we're all East Tennesseans. So that's my time. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Yes, sir.
I've been wondering about this. Last week, we had a newspaper article about the Indian mound in Sequoia Hills. And there's been a lot of negotiation about what it is. Jeff Chapman has told me one story in the past, and I've heard another story. And you've got two competing signs. One gives one history on one side of it, one gives a different history on the other, which I've always enjoyed in the walking. What do you think is under there?
Well, firstly, I'm not an archaeologist. I don't know. And there's a difference. So we've been spending a lot of time, as you know, you'll read our letters. We've been spending a lot of time over in Cherokee, learning the Cherokee traditions and trying to be more central and inclusive to Cherokee narratives. There are two types of mounds. One's a burial mound and one's the center of a kind of village mound. That location, to me, right on the river, indicates that it would have been a mound that would have had like a hut or something built on top of it, as a kind of central location. I don't know that, and I don't know what's under there. I do know that with the new laws that are called the NAGPRA Act, that anything that's found has to be returned to Cherokee, and they're very sensitive about taking things out of the ground. So it's a really complex thing, but I have been to Sequoia Hills and seen both of those signs. And the truth is, and this is what's very frustrating, we may never know. We may never know the truth of it. We can certainly do research, because I've even seen things that indicate that those mounds may predate the Cherokee, right, in the region, which means they may be Yuchi or someone else. But I don't know that there's any real way to know.
Didn't they dig up some things maybe at the late 19th or early 20th century?
Yes, they did.
You know what they were?
I don't, but I think they found various fragments of pots and things there. But I don't know if it cleared up exactly how it was used, because that's also how we understood how the Cherokee lived, for instance, with their mounds and the way the mounds were shaped and the way the doors worked, has completely been revolutionized by the work of a historian at Western Carolina University, Dr. James Riggs, I think is his name. Or Briggs maybe. But he's arguing that actually, and he can prove this kind of mathematically, which is nuts, that there were 3 different mound complexes in North Carolina near Franklin. And that, of course, there are hills between them all and in Chota and these places. And they all lined up to the stars, and all the doors were sort of triangulated, and they're all only by a few centimeters. So, I mean, the Cherokee were able to kind of build these structures using mathematics is kind of revolutionary. And so we don't know. But there's some very interesting things going on there with new studies that are being done into the Cherokee and to the Yuchi. Yes, sir.
First question, how many of you here, raise your hand, if you majored in history in college?
Does geology count?
Kind of. That's epochal history.
That's not very good. But here's my real question. We're talking about the Indians. You're talking about the American Revolution. It seems to me, if you were an Indian, Native American, and all those tribes, which were all over the place, if they had had some real true organizational ability, we were down after the revolution. We didn't want to fight much more. We were fatigued. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're arguing there. I don't know, I mean, so it's quite complex. Because the intertribal relationships that existed long before the British showed up, or the sort of Europeans, there were infighting, there were relationships. Sometimes tribes would dissolve and then join other tribes. I mean, it was constantly in flux. And so it's impossible to see. There's a fantastic book I've been reading called In the Wake of the Conquistadors, that talks about how European sort of ideals about war or family or things like this start kind of, I'm going to say, affecting the way the Native Americans understood themselves and their own roles in things. And so how they sort of adapted to. So for instance, the Ute tribe, as well as the Cherokee tribe, started trading slaves in order to make money with the British. That was still done in those days. This is like 1720. And so, this adaptation leads to a kind of really interesting thing about how different, even interior kind of stories and narratives that each tribe would have about how they were founded sort of gets changed because of the sudden realization that there are other people, right, that are completely different, have completely different values. And so it's difficult for me to say, we look at it, we think, well, you should just join together and then try to fight the sort of outside force or whatever. But that's not necessarily their view of it at all, because they may have a bigger problem. For instance, in 1716, the Cherokee basically had as a result of various infighting with the English, basically go and kind of obliterate the Ute. The Ute, what's left of the Ute, go and join the Creek Confederation. So, there are kind of blood feuds that exist that have nothing to do with Europe. You know what I mean? And so it's difficult to say who's on whose side. And I mean, it switches, right? It's whoever you can get the best deal from. It's constantly in flux. So it's difficult. Yes, sir.
For the genealogy research,
Yeah.
that you were talking about, what if somebody's not from East Tennessee necessarily? Is that still intertwined where we can go and like have some resources from outside, like we should go to Cumberland, I don't know where I come from.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so you can start your journey. I mean, you don't have to be from East Tennessee at all, right? Like, you can come to the East Tennessee Center, spend some time with Ann Bloomquist or George Schweitzer. In fact, at History Hootenanny, we've got lots of genealogical workshops where if you sit down and list out, as far back as you can go, grandmother, great grandmother, whatever, great grandmother, great grandfather, great grandfather, and give that information to them. They can go to ancestry.com or findagrave.com. There's lots of tech now that can help, and it'll start pointing you in the right direction. Sometimes the physical stuff that's held in the archives will be useful. Sometimes it won't. But it will tell you where you need to go. Maybe you need to go to Alabama. And I should, just speaking about the American Revolution, I should also, one of the things I'm a part of the Tennessee State Commission for the celebration of the 250th. I should have mentioned this. And we've currently been looking at how we're going to celebrate and commemorate the 250th anniversary of 1776, the founding of the country. And a lot of that's probably going to be up towards the Tri-Cities with Watauga and the Watauga Association, because it's such an important historical moment. But there'll be lots of symposium and lots of celebrations. So we've been working with the legislature in Nashville to sort of get funding and to put these plans into place. So I'll keep everyone posted on how that develops. That's another thing I've been working on. Are there other questions? Yes, sir.
Maybe you can't answer this, maybe you can. What would you expect to see in the East Tennessee History Center 50 or 100 years from now? What's going on now that you think is historically significant, if anything? That's
an awesome question. One of the things we have to do as museumologists, I don't know if that's a word, as historians, is we have to keep collecting. And it's silly to me that we might want to keep an 8-bit Nintendo, right, that came out in the 1980s. People tend to not want to collect from their own childhood because they think it's silly. It's silly for me to think that we should have a cell phone, but we do in fact have a cell phone. We have one of those Nokia brick phones, right, which is crazy. But so you have to constantly keep collecting. So one of the things I did, you know, there's been a lot of political, as we know, we're in a very contentious political time. History is kind of a battlefield right now. And everything's so politically divided. So every time there's been a kind of march downtown, whether it's, you know, pro-LGBT, anti-LGBT, whatever, I've gone out and kind of snuck around and taken loads of pictures. And, you know, and afterwards you can find signs on the ground, that kind of stuff, because that's something 50 years from now, historians are going to want to talk about. That's something I can guarantee you is going to be in history books, because this period that we're in right now is so politically contentious that people are going to be writing PhDs on this era of time forever. So all of this stuff I think is very important. I think I'm gonna be, oh yes.
One quick question. I don't know if the members know that the history of the Rotary Club of Knoxville is the oldest service civic club is stored at the East Tennessee Historical Society. So we are the only organization that has that privilege.
Thank you very much. It has been such an honor and a privilege to come and speak to you all today. I want to turn over. Thank you so much.